The apartment was clean. That was the first thing anyone would have noticed walking in. Not clean the way a home is clean when someone lives in it and maintains it with the ordinary attention of a person who has things to do and places to be. Clean the way a space gets when the person inside it has stopped generating the mess that living produces. The dishes were washed and stacked and had been washed and stacked in the same configuration for 3 days because he had not used them. The bed was made with a precision that would have impressed anyone who did not understand that the precision was not discipline. It was the absence of disruption. He had been sleeping on the same side and rising without disturbing the other half, because there was no longer any reason to disturb it, and disturbing it felt like acknowledging that. He sat in the chair by the window every evening from around 7 until the light was completely gone. Not reading, not watching anything, just sitting with the specific quality of stillness that a man develops when the noise of a shared life has been removed all at once, and what is left is not peace, but the acoustic shock of its absence. His phone was on the table beside the chair. It had not rung in 4 hours. He was not unhappy exactly. He could not locate unhappiness as a specific sensation. What he could locate was something quieter and more difficult to name. A sense of himself as a man who had been defined by his position in a structure and who was now, for the first time in 22 years, without the structure, not broken, not destroyed, simply undefinable in the terms he had always used to define himself. And in the space that the undefinability created, something was happening that he could not yet tell was healing or disappearing. If you have ever sat in that chair, or in something that felt exactly like it, then what I am about to say in the next 10 minutes is the thing you have been waiting for someone to say with enough precision to be useful. What I am about to explain is not comfortable. It is not a reassurance that everything will be fine. It is accurate. It is the clinical distinction between two states that look almost identical from the outside and feel almost identical from the inside, one of which is the most important work a man can do after the end of a long marriage, and one of which is that same work quietly becoming its own kind of damage. By the time this video ends, you will understand exactly which one you are in, how to know the difference with precision, and what the distinction requires of you going forward. I am Mr. Daniel. This is the relationship spectrum. The culture has 2 available stories about a man who is alone after a long marriage. The first story is that he is broken, that the aloneness is a symptom of damage, of the failure of the marriage, of the inadequacy that the marriage is ending confirmed. This story has enormous cultural traction. It is the story most people around him are telling, however quietly and however kindly, every time they ask whether he is seeing anyone yet, every time they suggest he should get back out there, every time the concern in their voices carries the faint but unmistakable signal that his solitude is a problem to be solved, rather than a condition to be inhabited. The second story is the one he tells himself on the better evenings, that he is choosing this, that the aloneness is deliberate and purposeful, that he is rebuilding from the ground up, discovering who he is outside the structure of the marriage, becoming, through the specific discipline of being alone, more fully himself than the marriage ever allowed. Both stories are available. Both stories are incomplete. And both stories are, in specific ways and for specific men at specific points in the aftermath of a long marriage, dangerously misleading. The clinical distinction that neither story contains is this. Solitude and isolation are not the same state. They produce similar external appearances. A man alone in an apartment. A man who has reduced his social engagement. A man who is spending significant time with himself rather than with others. From the outside, solitude and isolation look like the same photograph. From the inside, they are producing completely different psychological and neurological events, and the difference between them is not a matter of attitude or intention. It is a matter of what the aloneness is doing to the man's internal architecture. Solitude is the state in which a man is alone, and the aloneness is generative, in which the internal space that the absence of others creates is being used, not efficiently, not productively in any external or measurable sense, but used in the way that follows from genuine self-encounter. The man in solitude is having a relationship with himself. He is sitting with what he thinks and what he feels and what he values and what he has learned and what he wants, without the structuring presence of another person organizing those questions for him. Solitude is, In the clinical literature on psychological recovery after significant loss, one of the most important conditions for genuine grief processing, identity reconstruction, and the development of the self-knowledge that allows a man to make genuinely informed decisions about the next chapter of his life, rather than reactive decisions organized around the need to fill the space. Isolation is something that starts as solitude and continues past the point at which the aloneness is generative. It is the state in which the man who began by using the internal space has, without noticing the transition, begun to be used by it, in which the quiet that was once a resource has become a climate, in which the reduction of social engagement that was once a deliberate step back from the noise of a life that was not yet rebuilt has become, gradually and without announcement, a structural feature of a life that is no longer being rebuilt but simply inhabited. The transition between solitude and isolation is one of the most difficult things to detect from the inside, precisely because the external conditions do not change at the moment of transition. The man is still alone. He is still quiet. He is still, by his own account, working through things. The difference is interior. It is in whether the working through is still producing movement, or whether it has, at some point he cannot identify, stopped producing movement and started producing sediment. There are 4 markers that separate the man in genuine solitude from the man who has crossed into isolation. I want to give them to you with enough precision that you can read them accurately in your own experience, rather than in the abstract. The first marker is the quality of your relationship with time. Solitude has a different relationship to time than isolation does. In solitude, time feels, even when it is slow and even when it is heavy, like it is moving. There is a sense, however faint, of a process underway, of something being worked through that will eventually produce a different internal state than the one you are currently in. In isolation, time stops feeling like it is moving and starts feeling like it is accumulating. The days do not feel like progress towards something. They feel like more of the same thing, expanding to fill whatever space is available, without the felt sense of direction that genuine grief processing and genuine identity reconstruction produce even in their most difficult phases. The second marker is the direction of your thinking. Solitude produces thinking that moves, that covers ground, that arrives at places it has not been before, even when those places are uncomfortable. The man in genuine solitude is discovering things about himself and about what happened, not all of them welcome, that he did not know before the solitude made them available. Isolation produces thinking that circles, that returns to the same points repeatedly without advancing past them, that generates a quality of rumination rather than reflection. The same analysis of what happened, the same assessment of who was responsible, the same inventory of what was lost, cycling through without the modification that genuine processing would produce. The third marker is your relationship with the future. Solitude maintains, however dimly and however without specific content, a connection to the future as a real space, a space that exists ahead of where you are and that you are, in some sense that you cannot yet fully describe, moving toward. The man in genuine solitude may not know what the future looks like. He may not have specific plans or a clear vision of what comes next, but the future is still present to him as a concept, as a real and inhabitable space that he believes, on the evidence of the work he is doing, he will eventually arrive in. Isolation severs that connection. The future stops being a real space and starts being an abstraction, something that other people inhabit, but that does not feel specifically relevant to the life you are currently inside. The fourth marker is the most important and the most difficult to assess honestly. It is the direction of your self-knowledge. Genuine solitude produces a specific kind of growing self-knowledge, not comfortable self-knowledge, not the self-knowledge that confirms what you already believed about yourself, the kind that challenges and expands and sometimes dismantles what you thought you knew about who you are and what you need and what you are capable of. The man in genuine solitude is, across weeks and months, developing a more accurate and more complete picture of himself than he had before. Isolation produces a different result. The self-knowledge stops developing, the picture stops updating. The man's understanding of himself at month 8 is essentially identical to his understanding of himself at month 2. The process of self-discovery has stopped, and a man whose self-discovery has stopped is a man who is no longer healing. He is maintaining. Maintaining is not the same as healing. Maintaining is the management of a state that is no longer in active development. It is survivable. Many men do it for years. But it is not what the solitude after a long marriage was supposed to produce. It was supposed to produce a man who knows himself more completely than he did inside the marriage, who has grieved what needs to be grieved with enough depth that the grief does not organize his behavior from below the surface of his awareness, who has developed, through genuine encounter with himself in the silence, the self-knowledge that makes his next chapter a genuine next chapter rather than a continuation of the last one with different furniture. That is the destination of genuine solitude. Not the apartment, not the clean dishes, not the chair by the window in the specific quality of silence that a man develops when the noise of a shared life has been removed. The destination is clarity, the kind that only comes from having sat with yourself long enough and honestly enough that you finally know who you are outside the structure that defined you. And a man with that clarity is not a man who is disappearing. He is a man who is, finally and for the first time, appearing. Drop a comment. Men, I want to know, when you sit with yourself in the silence after your marriage, does the silence feel like it is moving, or does it feel like it is accumulating? And what is the specific thing you believe you are supposed to be finding in it that you have not yet found? Subscribe to the Relationship Spectrum. Every week, I break down the psychological realities of life after long marriage with enough clinical precision and enough honesty that the man watching finally has the language for what he is living through and the map he needs to navigate it with intention rather than by default.